Seraphina had known she wouldn't be allowed inside for the coronation. The message had been clear when the head servant told her to arrive early to help with preparations, but to make herself scarce before the actual ceremony began. Albino omegas brought bad luck to sacred events, or so the old superstitions claimed. Their presence could curse a new reign before it even started, so Seraphina had done what she always did, worked hard, kept her head down, and prepared to be invisible when it mattered. She had spent 3 days helping to decorate the great throne room, polishing every surface until it gleamed, arranging flowers and ceremonial banners with meticulous care. The coronation of the new Alpha King was the most important event in generations, and even though she wouldn't be allowed to witness it, she took pride in making sure everything was perfect. The morning of the ceremony, Seraphina had been up before dawn, doing final checks and making sure all the candles were lit, all the ceremonial items were in their proper places. Then, as the first nobles began to arrive, she had slipped out through the servants' entrance as instructed. But something had made her linger. Maybe it was curiosity about the new king, who everyone said was different from any alpha who had come before. Maybe it was the desire to see, even from a distance, the ceremony she had worked so hard to prepare. Or maybe it was just that she had nowhere else to go, and the stone hallway outside the throne room doors was as good a place as any to wait out the hours until her next shift. The massive doors to the throne room were closed, but they weren't sealed completely. Through the narrow gap, Seraphina could see slivers of the ceremony, flashes of formal robes, glimpses of the assembled nobility, fragments of the ancient words being spoken. She pressed herself against the wall beside the door, trying to stay out of sight while still being able to hear what was happening inside. The throne room was packed with wolves from across the kingdom. Every noble family, every pack alpha, every wolf of any importance had come to witness the coronation. The outgoing king's voice rang through the space as he prepared to pass the crown to his successor. By the ancient laws and the blessing of the moon goddess, the old king intoned, "I present to you your new Alpha King. May he rule with wisdom and strength. May he protect the weak and lead the strong. May his reign bring prosperity to all under his protection." There was a pause, and Seraphina shifted slightly to get a better view through the gap in the doors. What she saw made her breath catch in her throat. The new king was unlike any alpha she had ever seen. He was tall and powerfully built, clearly possessing tremendous strength, but what made her stare was his appearance. His hair was not the common browns or blacks, or even the occasional blonde. It was silver-white, falling past his shoulders in a way that caught the candlelight and seemed to glow. His skin was pale, and even from her limited vantage point, she could see eyes that were a distinctive light color. He was albino, just like her. The new Alpha King of the Northern Territories was an albino, sitting on the throne in front of the entire nobility, being crowned despite the very superstitions that had kept Seraphina outside these doors. She watched, transfixed, as the crown was placed on his head. He looked powerful and confident, accepting the weight of leadership with a grace that suggested he had been born for this. No one in the throne room seemed concerned about his appearance. No one whispered about curses or bad luck. They bowed and pledged their loyalty without hesitation. So why was she not allowed inside? If an albino could be king, why couldn't an albino omega stand among the witnesses? The bitter irony of it made Seraphina's eyes burn with unshed tears. But she blinked them back and continued watching through the crack in the door. At least she could see part of the ceremony, even if she couldn't be part of it. The new king rose from the throne, his voice carrying clearly through the great hall. "I, Lucian Winterborn, accept the crown and the responsibility that comes with it. I pledge to rule fairly, to protect all wolves regardless of rank or circumstance, and to challenge any law or tradition that values status over character." The words were standard enough, part of the traditional coronation oath. But something about the way he said them, the emphasis on all wolves, and regardless of rank or circumstance, made Seraphina think he meant them more deeply than most kings probably did. Let all who would pledge their loyalty to the crown come forward, Lucian continued, and the nobility began to move in an organized procession toward the throne. Seraphina knew this part would take hours. Each noble family would make their formal pledge, would be acknowledged by the new king, would exchange the ritual words that bound them in fealty. She should probably leave, should go find somewhere else to wait, but she found herself unable to move away from the door. The procession had barely begun when something unexpected happened. A draft from somewhere in the castle caught the massive doors, pushing one of them open slightly wider. Just a few inches, but enough that the gap Seraphina had been peering through suddenly became visible from inside the throne room. And the new king, Lucian Winterborn, looked directly at her. Their eyes met across the distance, and Seraphina felt her heart stop. She should look away, should step back out of sight, should do anything other than stand there frozen, while the Alpha King stared at her with an intensity that made her skin prickle with awareness. But she couldn't move. Those pale eyes held her captive, and she could see something shift in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition, or something else she couldn't identify. Then Lucian did something that made the entire throne room fall silent. He raised his hand, halting the procession of nobles mid-step, and spoke in a voice that carried absolute authority. "Stop." The single word echoed through the great hall, and every wolf present froze. The noble who had been in mid-pledge stumbled to a halt, confusion evident on his face. Murmurs began to ripple through the crowd as everyone tried to understand what was happening. Lucian's eyes never left Seraphina's face as he spoke again. "Someone explain to me why there is a wolf standing outside these doors. Why is she not inside with the rest of my subjects?" The question was directed at the throne room in general, but it was the head servant who answered, his voice nervous and apologetic. "Your Majesty, that is just one of the Omega servants. She helped with preparations but was instructed to leave before the ceremony began, as is traditional for..." "As is traditional for what?" Lucian interrupted, his voice sharp. "Finish that sentence." The servant hesitated, clearly realizing he was about to say something problematic. "As is traditional for Omegas of particular appearance, Your Majesty. The old belief suggests that albinism can bring misfortune to sacred ceremonies." The silence that followed was deafening. Every wolf in the throne room was staring at their new king, an albino himself, who had just been told that someone was excluded from his coronation because of the same condition he possessed. "I see." Lucian's voice was cold enough to freeze blood. "So let me understand this correctly. On the day of my coronation, my staff decided that it would be appropriate to exclude one of my subjects from witnessing the ceremony because of superstitious nonsense about her appearance. The same appearance that I share. Is that accurate?" No one seemed willing to answer that question. The head servant had gone pale, clearly realizing he had made a terrible mistake. The assembled nobles were exchanging nervous glances, probably trying to figure out how to distance themselves from this decision. Lucian rose from his throne with fluid grace, and the power radiating from him made every wolf in the room want to submit. "That wolf standing outside my throne room, bring her inside, now." "Your Majesty," an elderly noble ventured carefully. "Perhaps we should continue with the ceremony first. We can address this matter afterward." "I said now." The alpha command in Lucian's voice was unmistakable and irresistible. "Bring her inside and bring her to me. We will not continue the ceremony until she is where she belongs, standing among her fellow wolves, being treated with the dignity she deserves." Guards moved toward the door, but Lucian stopped them with a gesture. "No, not the guards." His eyes found Seraphina's again, still visible through the gap in the door. "She will come on her own, if she chooses, without compulsion or force." He addressed her directly now, his voice somehow both gentle and carrying enough to be heard clearly. "You, outside these doors. I am Lucian Winterborn, your Alpha King. I am asking, not commanding but asking, if you would do me the honor of entering this throne room and standing as witness to my coronation. Will you come inside?" Seraphina's hands were shaking as she processed what was happening. The Alpha King, in the middle of his own coronation, had stopped the entire ceremony because she was being excluded. He was asking her, an Omega servant that most nobles wouldn't even acknowledge existed, to enter the throne room, to stand as a witness, to be treated as if she had value. She should refuse, should thank him politely and decline, should stay in her proper place and not cause any more disruption to this important ceremony. That's what any sensible Omega would do. But looking at him, at the understanding and something like kinship in his pale eyes, Seraphina found herself nodding. Found her feet carrying her forward, even as her brain screamed that this was madness. She pushed the door open wider and stepped into the throne room. The assembled nobility parted before her like water, no one quite willing to block her path when the Alpha King himself had called for her presence. Seraphina kept her eyes lowered as she walked, acutely aware of her simple servant's dress, her bare feet, her white hair that marked her as different. "Look at me." Lucien's voice was soft now, meant for her alone, even though hundreds could hear. "Please. I want to see your face." Seraphina raised her eyes and found him watching her with an expression that made her heart race. Not disgust or pity, those she would have recognized, but something else, something that looked almost like wonder. "What is your name?" he asked. "Seraphina, your majesty." Her voice came out barely above a whisper, but the throne room was so silent that everyone heard. "Seraphina?" He repeated her name with something like reverence. "That's a beautiful name. It means burning ones in the old language. Did you know that?" She shook her head, not trusting her voice. "It's appropriate." Lucian descended from his throne, each step bringing him closer to where she stood frozen in the center of the hall. Because despite what small-minded wolves might think, there is nothing cursed or unfortunate about our appearance. We don't bring misfortune. We burn bright, Seraphina. We stand out, not because we're flawed, but because we're meant to be seen. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could see the exact shade of his eyes, a pale blue-gray that was almost silver in the candlelight, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his powerful body, could smell his scent of pine and winter frost. "You helped prepare this throne room for my coronation," he said. It wasn't a question, but she nodded anyway. "You worked for days to make everything perfect, even knowing you wouldn't be allowed to see the ceremony. Why?" "Because it was my duty, Your Majesty, and because—" She hesitated, then decided that if he was going to reject her, at least it would be for being honest. "Because I wanted it to be beautiful. Even if I couldn't be part of it, I wanted it to be something worth remembering." Something shifted in Lucian's expression, and he turned to address the assembled nobility. "This Omega has more nobility in her smallest gesture than some wolves have in their entire lineage. She worked to create beauty for an event she knew would exclude her. She took pride in service, even when that service wasn't valued. And she was prepared to stand outside these doors for hours rather than cause a disruption by requesting entry." His voice hardened. "Meanwhile, my staff, wolves who are supposed to serve all members of this kingdom, decided that ancient superstitions mattered more than treating every subject with dignity. That ends now." He looked back at Seraphina, and his voice gentled again. "Will you stay? Will you stand here and witness the rest of this ceremony? I want you to see what you helped create." "Your Majesty, I'm not dressed appropriately. I'm just a servant. I don't belong." "You belong exactly where I say you belong," Lucian interrupted, but not unkindly. "And right now, I say you belong here, in this throne room, bearing witness to a moment you helped make possible. Will you do me the honor?" Seraphina felt tears building behind her eyes, but blinked them back. "Yes, Your Majesty. If you wish it." "I do wish it." He offered her his hand, and after a moment of hesitation, she took it, The contact sent electricity racing through both of them, and Seraphina heard Lucian's sharp intake of breath. The mate bond, she realized with shock. That unmistakable spark that told them they were meant for each other. From the way Lucian's eyes widened, he felt it too. But he didn't comment on it, not here in front of hundreds of witnesses. Instead, he simply said, "Come. Stand beside my throne where everyone can see you, where you should have been from the beginning." He led her up the steps to the throne platform, and Seraphina was acutely aware of every eye following their progress. This was unprecedented, probably scandalous, definitely going to be talked about for years. But Lucian didn't seem to care, and something about his confidence made her stand a little straighter. When they reached the throne, Lucian addressed the assembly again. "Let this be the first decree of my reign. No wolf in my kingdom will be excluded from any public ceremony or gathering based solely on their appearance. Albinism is not a curse. It is simply a variation in our kind. Anyone who perpetuates these harmful superstitions will answer to me personally." He turned to the outgoing king, who had been watching the entire exchange with barely concealed amusement. "My apologies for the disruption, Your Majesty. But I needed to make this clear from the very beginning of my rule. May we continue?" The old king smiled, and there was approval in his expression. "By all means, Your Majesty. Though I suspect you've already shown everyone here exactly what kind of king you're going to be." The coronation ceremony resumed, but everything had changed. Seraphina stood beside the throne, visible to everyone, while Lucian completed his formal ascension to power. The nobility who had initially looked scandalized gradually began to look thoughtful instead, as if reassessing everything they thought they knew about rank and worth and value. When it came time for the nobles to make their pledges of loyalty, more than one of them glanced at Seraphina with new respect rather than dismissal. The old prejudices wouldn't disappear overnight, but Lucian had made it clear that they had no place in his kingdom. After what felt like hours, the formal ceremony finally concluded. The nobility began to filter out toward the great hall, where a coronation feast had been prepared. Lucian remained on his throne, and when the last noble had left, he finally turned to Seraphina with an expression of relief. "Thank you for staying," he said quietly. "I know that was probably overwhelming." "Your Majesty, I should be thanking you. You didn't have to stop your coronation for me. You didn't have to challenge centuries of tradition because one servant was left outside." "Yes, I did." Lucian's voice was firm. "Because if I had let it pass, if I had allowed that injustice to stand unchallenged on the very day I became king, then I would have been no better than every ruler who came before and did nothing to change unjust traditions." He stood and moved closer, and Seraphina found she couldn't step back, even though protocol probably demanded it. "Besides, the moment I saw you through that door, I felt something I've been waiting my entire life to experience." "You felt it too, didn't you? The mate bond?" Seraphina nodded, not trusting her voice. "I've spent my entire life being told that my appearance was a flaw I had to overcome," Lucian continued, his voice rough with emotion. "That I could be king despite being albino, but that it would always be something I had to work twice as hard to prove wasn't a weakness. And then I saw you standing outside those doors, excluded from a ceremony that should have welcomed all my subjects, and I realized nothing had really changed. The prejudices were still there, just hidden under pretty words and careful politeness." His hand came up to gently touch her white hair, and Seraphina shivered at the contact. "But looking at you, Seraphina, I don't see a flaw. I see someone who is beautiful exactly as they are. Someone who didn't need to overcome anything because there was nothing wrong with them in the first place. And I thought, if I can see that in you, maybe you can help me see it in myself." "You're the Alpha King," Seraphina whispered. "You don't need an Omega servant to tell you that you're worthy." "Maybe I don't need it," Lucian agreed, "but I want it. I want a partner who understands what it's like to be judged for something they can't control. Someone who has learned to be strong, not despite being different, but because of it. Someone who sees past the crown to the person underneath, because they know exactly what it feels like to be reduced to your appearance, rather than valued for who you are. He stepped back slightly, giving her space. But Seraphina, I need you to understand something. I'm not asking you to accept the mate bond because of duty or obligation, or because I'm the Alpha King. I'm asking because from the moment I saw you, something in me recognized its match, my equal, my partner. But the choice has to be yours, made freely without any pressure or compulsion. I'm just a servant, Seraphina said, voicing the fear that had been building. I don't know anything about being queen. I don't know how to navigate court politics or manage a kingdom. You should be with someone who can actually help you rule, not someone who's only good for polishing floors and arranging flowers. You created beauty in a throne room you thought you'd never be allowed to enter, Lucian countered. You found purpose and pride in work that went unacknowledged. You stood outside those doors for hours because you wanted to be close to something meaningful, even if you couldn't fully participate. That shows more strength and grace than most nobles I've met display in their entire lives. He moved closer again, his voice dropping to something more intimate. And as for not knowing how to be queen, neither did I know how to be king when I was born. It's something you learn, something we can learn together. What matters isn't whether you have all the skills right now. What matters is whether you have the heart, the compassion, the strength of character that makes someone fit to lead. And Seraphina, you have all of that. What if I fail? What if I'm not good enough? Then we'll fail together and figure out how to do better. His smile was gentle and understanding. But I don't think you'll fail. I think you're going to surprise everyone, including yourself, with just how capable you are once someone gives you the chance to shine. Seraphina looked up at him, at this powerful alpha who had stopped his own coronation to call her inside, who had challenged centuries of prejudice in his very first act as king, who was now looking at her like she was precious rather than worthless. I'm scared, she admitted. Good. Being scared means you understand the magnitude of what this means. But Seraphina, I'll be beside you every step of the way. You won't be doing this alone. Then, she took a deep breath, feeling like she was standing on the edge of a cliff about to jump. Then yes, I accept the mate bond, the role of queen, all of it. Not because you're the Alpha King, or because I feel obligated, but because something in me recognized you too. Because when you looked at me like I had value, like I was worth stopping a coronation for, I felt more seen than I've felt in my entire life. The smile that spread across Lucian's face was radiant enough to outshine every candle in the throne room. Thank you, he breathed, pulling her carefully into his arms. Thank you for being brave enough to say yes. When he kissed her, the mate bond solidified between them with a force that made the very stones of the throne room seem to vibrate. This was destiny, Seraphina realized. This was what it felt like when two souls recognized their perfect match. When they finally broke apart, both glowing with the bond's energy, Lucian rested his forehead against hers. There's going to be gossip, he warned. Probably some resistance from traditional nobles who think I should have chosen someone of higher birth. Are you prepared for that? As long as you're beside me, I can handle anything, Seraphina replied, surprising herself with the conviction in her voice. Then let's go to the feast. Let's show everyone that the albino Omega, who was left outside the ceremony, is exactly where she belongs, standing beside her mate, preparing to help lead a kingdom into a new era. They walked hand in hand toward the great hall, and Seraphina felt a strength building in her that she had never known she possessed. She was done hiding, done accepting that her appearance made her less valuable, done letting other wolves define her worth. The feast hall fell silent when they entered together. Lucian in his coronation robes and crown, Seraphina in her simple dress, but holding herself with new confidence. The assembled nobility stared, some with shock, others with dawning understanding, a few with obvious disapproval. Lucian didn't give anyone time to voice objections. He raised his voice to address the entire gathering. Wolves of the Northern Territories, I present to you my mate and your future queen, Seraphina Winterborn. She will stand beside me as we work to build a kingdom that values all wolves, regardless of rank or appearance or circumstances of birth. Anyone who cannot accept this is welcome to leave now. No one left. A few noble families exchanged glances that suggested they weren't happy about it, but no one dared directly challenge the Alpha King on the day of his coronation. Gradually, nobles began approaching to offer formal congratulations. Most were polite, if not enthusiastic, but a surprising number, particularly some of the younger wolves, looked genuinely pleased. One young alpha even bowed deeply and said, "Your Majesty, I think this is the best decision you could have made. We need leaders who understand what it's like to be judged unfairly, who will create space for all of us to be valued for who we are, rather than what we look like." As the feast continued, Seraphina found herself surrounded by wolves who wanted to meet her, to welcome her, to express support for the new direction the kingdom was taking. It was overwhelming, but in a good way. And Lucian never left her side, his presence a constant reassurance that she wasn't facing this alone. Late in the evening, when they finally had a moment of relative privacy in a quieter corner of the hall, Lucian pulled her close and whispered, "Thank you for taking a chance on me. On us. I know this isn't how you expected your day to go. This morning, I was a servant preparing to spend hours standing outside a door," Seraphina replied with a smile. "Tonight, I'm standing beside the Alpha King as his mate. Nothing about today has been what I expected." "Are you happy?" Lucian asked, and there was genuine concern in his voice. "This is all happening so fast. If you need time to adjust, if you want to slow down—" "I'm happy," Seraphina interrupted, and realized she meant it. Terrified and overwhelmed, and still not entirely sure this isn't a dream, but happy. "For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm where I'm supposed to be." "You are," Lucian assured her. "You're exactly where you belong. And I'm going to spend every day proving to you that being left outside that ceremony was the best thing that could have happened, because it gave me the excuse to bring you inside where everyone could see how remarkable you are." As they stood together, watching the celebration of a new reign, Seraphina thought about the journey that had brought her here. From a servant who believed herself cursed to a queen who was beginning to understand that different didn't mean less. She had been left outside the ceremony, excluded and dismissed, told her presence would bring misfortune. But the White Alpha King had called her into his throne room, had stopped his coronation to demand she be treated with dignity, had seen value where others saw only superstition. And in doing so, he had changed everything. Not just for Seraphina, but for every wolf who had ever been told they weren't good enough because of something they couldn't control. The albino Omega, who had stood outside in the cold, had become a queen standing in the warmth of acceptance. And the White Alpha King, who understood exactly what it meant to be judged by appearance, had found his perfect match in someone who shared both his appearance and his determination to create a better world. Sometimes the most important moments begin with exclusion and end with belonging. Sometimes being left outside is just the universe's way of making sure everyone notices when the door finally opens. And sometimes, the person standing in the doorway is exactly who you were meant to find all along.